Upsets were afoot this week. Some phenomenal football was played. The Browns pulled off a surprising win. The Jets fell to the Patriots. But most importantly of all, we had a dynamic duel between the number 1 and number 2 overall draft pick. That's what we're going to start with. Plenty of interesting topics today and getting right into it. 18-15, a low-scoring game between the Washington Commanders and the Chicago Bears. We all saw the ending. We saw the tipped Hail Mary, the triumphant salvation of Jayden Daniels, and the bitter defeat Caleb Williams was subjected to. Looking at this game, everything I've kind of thought about Caleb Williams was proven right. He played a better defense than he has the past 4 weeks, struggled greatly. I don't think he's a bad quarterback by any means, but he's been playing poorly when it's been asked of him to step up in big moments. Good final drive, capped off by some questionable play calling multiple times by the defense. But Jayden Daniels, with a rib injury, unable to move to the same extent he could, is still able to just loft that ball 65 yards through the air. Is still able to navigate a dirty pocket, get balls off, complete deep throws. He looks really special. The athlete he is, the player is, the processing ability he has are all so much better than I thought they would be coming out of college. He's clearly the quarterback one. He carried the Commanders in conjunction with their defense to a victory, and the Commanders are pretty clearly going to be a playoff team this year, particularly with how bad the Cowboys have been in the NFC East. They're winning at least one of those two matchups. They're getting a wild card spot. All in all, phenomenal game, phenomenal season from Washington. If you're a defensive sicko, you really like this game, and Jayden Daniels got to be the Rookie of the Year.
The two biggest storylines heading into this game was Jayden Daniels versus Caleb Williams. Over the first few weeks, we saw Jayden Daniels as one of the most poised rookie quarterbacks I think we have ever seen. Caleb Williams has struggled in some moments, especially against good defenses. And I think there's a few major takeaways we can have for each of these teams in this game. On the Bears side of things, even though Caleb Williams has looked rough to say the least against some defenses that have been better, the coaching, the cohesiveness on the offensive side of the ball is nowhere near what we're seeing out of Washington or some other teams around the league. And it goes hand in hand. Caleb Williams hasn't been good, and the play calling is not particularly special or all that great to go along with it. So I think that is a problem for the Bears, especially this season. Maybe next season, when Caleb Williams is more developed, he can make up for some of the lack of play calling, creativity, or maybe it's something the Bears even look in the offseason to replace their offensive coordinator. But you mentioned them playing a better defense. The Commanders' defense has been widely talked about as bad, and I think a lot of credit needs to start being given towards Dan Quinn, because heading into the season, we weren't that optimistic for the Commanders. Everything that was talked about was the Commanders' offense. What is it going to look like with Jayden Daniels? Can Dan Quinn turn this organization around? And we should have expected it given what he did in Dallas, and he's doing the same thing with the Commanders. This defense is really starting to turn a corner. They're not super talented. They're by no means a top 10 defense in the NFL, but when they need to make plays, they're capable of forcing punts and getting the ball back to their super talented offense. So I think this Commanders team is getting more dangerous every single week because of their defense just being average to above average.
I mean, the issue you're going to run into with the Commanders' defense, the names they signed were much maligned in the offseason, particularly Bobby Wagner, who played a great game, very good in coverage for his standards at this point in his career. They were still an upgrade over what they had last year. Sam Howell had his limitations, but he would have to try and go win games 45-42 with how bad Washington's defense was in 2023. Jayden Daniels can still go out there and score those points, but now he's got backup. He is going up in a game with an even footing. He's not having to try and throw the Commanders back into every single football game, which really helps young quarterbacks. We haven't seen Caleb Williams truly be forced to throw himself back into a game. I don't think he'll do that well given what we've seen so far from him, at least early. I think he's getting a lot of criticism for this game, going 10 for 24. But looking at the Bears' offense, they were down there in position to win the game late, but decide to inexplicably hand the ball to an offensive lineman on the goal line. I get the rich history of fullbacks and Refrigerator Perry and whatever in Washington. That's a terrible move. That is what cost them the game. Bears fans are rightfully so pissed off at Eberflus and company for calling that play. Some are even calling for him to be fired. I think that's a pretty bad idea considering the defense will absolutely regress if he goes out the door. You've got to ask yourself what changes can be made by the Bears organization to better support Caleb Williams and this offense. Obviously, can't get rid of the head coach. maybe a new coordinator, but do you really want to move off a guy in his first year on the job? Do you want to attribute the shortcomings to Caleb Williams not being able to accurately get the ball out consistently, an inability to read pressure at the NFL level? Or do we just pin it on the OC and make him learn a second offense in 2 seasons?
The point I was trying to make, it's kind of both and. You have some really questionable decisions like that goal line carry, handing it off to an offensive lineman. There are other play calls along the course of the game where they have a screen pass to DJ Moore that I think it was a failed 4th down conversion or it was 3rd and short. I'm not particularly certain on that one, but there are just some decisions in the play calling creativity where you're left a little disappointed. But then on the other hand, there are times Caleb Williams just throws the ball up to nobody, doesn't make an accurate pass, and he's not even close to as poised as Jayden Daniels is under pressure when he needs to make a big play or the defense is right in his face. So it's kind of both and it is going to be interesting to see which direction the organization goes in to try and correct some of the things that are not exactly going ideal on the offensive side of the ball.
Worth noting, in previous weeks, particularly against the Colts, you made the excuse that, oh, well, the Bears didn't have a running game backing him up. DeAndre Swift played a phenomenal game. Obviously, that long 55-yard carry he had to score the touchdown. But all in all, effective on the ground, picking up that short yardage stuff, really just moving the chains, churning things out. The opportunities were there. Weak Washington secondary, a running game which was clicking. The opportunities were there, and Williams didn't capitalize on it. If not for Anthony Richardson, who we're going to talk about later, I'd say he had the worst quarterback performance of the week.
Well, the run game has certainly come along for the Bears over the previous 3 weeks, which is much better than what we saw, I think the first 4 weeks, I want to say, where it was the worst in the NFL. So DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson getting a few more carries here and there, it has certainly helped their offense. But I think from a play calling perspective and Caleb Williams, they need to step it up if they want to compete this season.
I feel like the running game we may have been a bit down on early considering Swift was averaging 0.2 yards a carry or something. Good defenses, new O-line, new running back with the O-line. We probably should have projected that to gel a little bit better. All in all, great win for Washington. Jayden Daniels was bolstered by a few long completions, still threw for over 300 yards, despite battling through a rib injury, which some were saying would hinder his power. We don't need to drone on about his Rookie of the Year campaign. I don't think it's really much of a competition at this point. Maybe you think Brian Thomas makes a push down the stretch, but quarterback centered award.
Brian Thomas is not going to have a narrative with the Jaguars winning 4 games.
Yeah, I'm kind of grasping at straws there, although someone was trying to peddle a Malik Neighbors narrative, and the Giants may win 3. So
a 7-win Giants with Andrew Thomas and Malik Neighbors dropping 1,600 yards receiving would have had an argument.
Too bad.
It's not going to happen.
Never going to happen. But on to one of the bigger upsets we've seen all season. The Browns beat the Ravens. If you watch this game, you know 2 things. One, Lamar Jackson should still be near the front of the line in terms of the MVP race. And Baltimore really just fell apart there. Both defensively, multiple dropped interceptions, one in the end zone, one on what should have been the final offensive play for the Browns, where the ball just bounces off Kyle Hamilton's hands. It looked like Jameis was throwing to him, running an out route with how it was just on him and nowhere near his receiver. The offense dropping multiple passes, Zay Flowers underperforming again in big moments. The narrative is once again starting. Lamar has no help around him, which is pretty funny considering they've got Derrick Henry. And all in all, I understand why Ravens fans are upset. This loss probably cost you any chance at having the 1 seed all year, because I don't think 3 losses is realistic for the Chiefs team the way we've been seeing them play. Maybe they lose 2 games, maybe they even lose 3, but they have the tiebreaker over you. All in all, bad loss with the Ravens. Clearly, you know why it happened. You know you could have played better. You've got clear identifiable areas of weakness. For the Browns, Jameis Winston is so much better than Deshaun Watson, it's not even funny. Same can be said about Joe Flacco. Any quarterback you insert in the system is better than Deshaun Watson, which makes that anger of a contract he is on for the next 3 years all the more funny. Cleveland has never been more cooked than they are now. This win does not turn their season around. And unless James is going to somehow transfer all his talent and his ability to give pregame speeches into Watson's body, that will continue to be the worst contract and the worst trade ever.
Speaking to the Ravens first, on the offensive side of the ball, for those that are saying Lamar Jackson has no help, the offense in this game was not a complete disaster. It was still very productive. If Rashad Bateman doesn't drop that 50-yard pass, they probably win the game. It was a great pass by Lamar to find him down the field wide open. It bounces right off of his chest. Zay Flowers was very productive. Derrick Henry did his thing again. Lamar Jackson is on a tear and should be leading the MVP voting odds. The offense is not a problem right now. Ravens fans, if you're complaining about that and you're disappointed with that on your team right now, you're complaining about the wrong thing. The reason the Ravens lost this game is their defense. They have the best run defense in the NFL, but they have the worst pass defense in the NFL.
Jacksonville.
They're giving up the most yards per game.
Fair enough. I'm just going to tell you the Jaguars have a worse passing defense, but you can get into the minutia. You cannot argue the Jaguars have a worse passing defense. They're really bad.
You're getting to the minutia. No one cares. The Jaguars are obviously a really bad team, but for a team that has Super Bowl hopes, when you were giving up the most passing yards per game in the NFL and your defense was a strength last year, you are going to struggle to beat teams that have competent quarterback play. And look what happened when the Browns get a quarterback in there that is capable of processing a defense, making above high school level throws with Jameis Winston. He was able to push the ball down the field. You're going to be in games with teams you probably shouldn't be in games with. I mean, the only game this year their defense has shut down the opposing quarterback was against Josh Allen. And how much does that actually mean when the Bills have a tendency to sometimes be really hot and sometimes be very cold? So, I mean, they've gotten lit up by Patrick Mahomes this year, Dak, Burrow, Jayden Daniels, Baker, now Jameis. Every single
all elite quarterbacks.
Every single time they play a quarterback that is good to elite, they are getting lit up, and you cannot have that. Or if you do have that, Lamar needs to play at an absurd level in order to consistently win come playoff time. So I think that is a problem for the Ravens right now.
Yeah, the Lamar regression in the playoffs could definitely hurt this team once again.
I wasn't talking about Lamar regression.
Yeah, just let me talk, man. But
you're talking about
the Clowney issue, which we talked about in the offseason, we'll say, oh, well, he had 9.5 sacks. We really think that is a schematic thing for the Ravens. We think his successor will be able to step up and do just fine. We were wrong. That pass rush took a massive hit when he left. They lost other pieces on the defense. The secondary still has the big names. They're just not performing. They are being left in man coverage, which the Ravens like running longer than they should be. No cornerback besides maybe Darrell Reeves can survive 4.5 seconds in man coverage with how good these wide receivers are now. It's a tough, unwinnable spot to be in. If you want to look at a team which could buy at the trade deadline, I know everybody's been talking about, Crosby is going to get shipped off to Detroit for whatever. I would be surprised if the Ravens didn't make some move at the deadline to try and get an edge rusher of meaningful quality. Might not be Crosby, definitely won't be Myles Garrett. They're not sending him in division, but they're going to go after people to try and generate pressures at the trade deadline. I would be astounded if they didn't. This Ravens team has a clear ceiling. As I mentioned, Lamar regresses in the playoffs. Even if he doesn't, they're going to get lit up by a Josh Allen, assuming he starts hot, lit up by Patrick Mahomes, again, who rises in the playoffs. Maybe even a Joe Burrow, and hopefully the Bengals defense can keep up with a diminished Lamar. I don't know. I used to think this was the best team in the AFC could beat the Chiefs they played again today. Losses like this make me question that.
Their offense is still incredible, and I believe in Lamar Jackson, and I'm not going to get on the Lamar Jackson diminished narrative in the playoffs. I'm still a fan of the Ravens offense, but their defense is just a major question mark. And on the Browns side of things, Jameis just proved how pathetic Deshaun Watson was, because once you give Kevin Stefanski, a former coach of the year, a competent quarterback, he's going to put a very solid offense on the field. And it makes you question, if Jameis was a starter at the beginning of the season, where would the Browns be now? Because this version of the Browns seems capable of beating almost anyone, and they just traded their best receiver to the Buffalo Bills. So, I mean, over their next 4 games, they play the Chargers, Saints, Steelers, and Broncos. This version of the Browns, those feel like very winnable games before they play the Chiefs.
Jameis Winston should have had 2 interceptions this game. I like hyping up Jameis as much as the next guy. He played a beatable game. This was not some offensive masterclass from the Stefanski. This was him getting lucky. his quarterback did not turn the ball over multiple times, not due to any of his own inherent skill, but due to the defense's shortcomings. They're not beating the Chargers. The Chargers destroy teams with sloppy offenses. They're well coached. Their defense is phenomenal. Was phenomenal at Michigan, is now phenomenal in the NFL. It's not happening there. I see what you're talking about some of those next games. That Chargers game does not feel winnable. I don't care about the Arizona outcome.
The Chargers offense also isn't as good as what they just played on the Ravens. So I don't think you can just chalk up the Chargers putting up enough points.
I am chalking up the Chargers defense outscoring Cleveland's offense. How about that?
That has potential.
That one's got some legs. Speaking of defensive shortcomings, though, our pals, the New York Jets, are done. Their season is over. I've tried to be nice. I've tried to justify the potential of Aaron Rodgers, the potential of this roster, how if they just gel together, they've got all these big names, they can make it work, get to the playoffs as a wild card, then go on a run. It's not happening. They just lost to the Patriots. Not only did they lose to the Patriots, they lost to the Patriots, who were forced to play Jacoby Brissett for long stretches because Drake May went down with a concussion. This is a bad team. And maybe they can crawl to 4 or 5 wins by the bye and have some glimmer of hope. But man, Rodgers looks washed. He looks old. He's not making the reads he used to. He's not running the offense on time with tempo. The running game, non-existent. The O-line isn't gelling together. They've been dealing with injuries. Their backups aren't stepping up. A terrible performance. The defense looks worse without Saleh. Part of that may be dealing with the quarterback they didn't game plan to stop. That really does hinder defenses, but still. Ramondre Stevenson, averaging 2 yards a carry, was the most effective offensive player in this game for either team. That should tell you all you need to know about the outcome. I am very disappointed in the Jets. I'm not surprised that Aaron Rodgers is a terrible clubhouse president and is dragging this team down. He should have gone and tried to be RFK's vice presidential candidate. If that was the case, he wouldn't have dropped down and supported Trump.
If the Jets can't beat the Patriots, who can they beat at this point? Jacoby Brissett played a majority of the game for the Patriots, and I mentioned it last week. I feel even stronger about it now, but this Jets defense, this Jets team is not the same without Robert Saleh. They went from giving up 17 points a game to now, over the course of a larger sample size, giving up 28 points a game with Robert Saleh not in the building. And I think a lot of people, they were maybe a little optimistic when Saleh was fired. They thought, oh, the new guy can turn things around in the locker room. Everyone's going to get on board. Just to change your scenery. At least that's what Woody Johnson was hoping for. And after the fact, it's clear a lot of players in that locker room loved Saleh, and Saleh had a much greater effect on one of the better defenses in the NFL than Woody Johnson would have liked to admit. So hindsight is 2020, of course, but the much smarter decision always would have been to let Robert Saleh demote Nathaniel Hackett. That happened anyway. Maybe still trade for Devontae Adams. Then you have a solid defense. Maybe your offense is just a smidge better, and you beat the Buffalo Bills and you beat the Patriots this week. And then you're sitting at least a doable record to make a playoff push towards the end of the season.
Not good. Not good. I still kind of agree with the choice to fire Saleh. The team was committing a ton of penalties. They were undisciplined. They came out slow every single week. Those are the marks of a bad head coach. It's apparent, though, that what was behind Saleh is not any better. It is, in fact, maybe worse. They're committing less penalties, so that's something at least. A silver lining on the Jets' disaster.
Less penalties with more embarrassing losses.
Woo! I mean, the embarrassing losses are staying at about the same rate. But a team which narrowly avoided an embarrassing loss, the Green Bay Packers, headed on down to Jacksonville. And as of recording this, Doug Peterson still has his job. I'm starting to think he's going to hold on to that until the end of the season. I could be wrong. I could be wrong already. We turned our phones on airplane mode. A notification could have came through that Doug Peterson has been relieved of his duties 5 minutes ago. Having said that, Love did not play particularly well. Had another bad turnover, no touchdowns, got injured. The severity of the injury is a little bit up in the air. We hope he doesn't miss time. But Malik Willis comes in, steps up, leads a game-winning drive, and proves once again that the Packers, one of the best coached teams, one of the best run offenses, and a legitimate contender to come out of the NFC. Great performance by Green Bay to rally from behind. You don't like giving up that many points to the Jaguars, but when Trevor Lawrence gets on one and has his talent available to him doing work, and now he's got a little bit less talent available to him thanks to the Christian Kirk injury, but as his guys catching balls, Evan Ingram, Brian Thomas, Christian Kirk, he's going to generate points. Gutty win by the Packers on the road. Pretty clear that they are one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the NFC. And what did you think of this sensational showing in Florida.
Well, just briefly, you mentioned Doug Peterson's job status and whether or not he'll get fired during the season or hang on to his job at least towards the end of the season. I think it's pretty much for certain that he's going to get fired eventually, but I do think he's going to keep on to his job until the end of the season, because it's not like a changing of the guard's really going to change all that much in Jacksonville now that Christian Kirk is done for the year. Brian Thomas is banged up with a chest injury. Gabe Davis has an injury that he's dealing with. Travis Etienne is still injured, albeit Tank Bigsby has been very good in place of him. So it's an injury-riddled offense with no hope really of making the playoffs and a pathetic defense. So I think they kind of just ride out the suckiness of this season.
I'd say there's a glimmer of hope because now Stephon Diggs looks like he might be done for the year. CJ Stroud's not been playing at that level we'd expect. The Texans are really banged up. The Colts are the Colts, and the rest of that division is not special. So maybe you think, okay, we can steal some games down the stretch and grab that division title spot. It's not completely over yet, but we're nearing the end in Jacksonville.
We're halfway through the season and they have 2 wins, so I would be shocked
Stranger things
if
have
they're
happened.
able to turn that type of corner.
Stranger things
But
have happened.
with the Packers specifically, the Jordan Love injury really stinks, obviously because you want your starting quarterback, your star starting quarterback, healthy every single week to help your team win games. But the other reason it sucks is because of who they play next week. They play the Detroit Lions, a team who is absolutely on fire after they dropped 50 on the Tennessee Titans. So you'd like to have your starting quarterback heading into that one, but I don't think they should start him next week, depending on the severity of the groin injury, because you have a bye week right after that, and I would rather have him for the stretch of games of Chicago, San Fran, presumably a healthy Miami, and then the Lions again, than a game right before their bye week where maybe he's risking getting injured, and then he could make it even worse and be out for a longer stretch.
The decision to sit Jordan Love, if he could theoretically play that game, was the decision basically not to pursue the NFC North title and just be content with a wild card spot, having to go on the road in the playoffs to hostile environments, and feeling confident in your team that if they are healthy, they'll be able to win games. A team like the Chiefs has done that in the past, where they show an abundance of caution with injured players, knowing that they can rise in the playoffs even if they don't have home field advantage. If I was a young team like the Packers, a team which is volatile, I would want that. I would want the home advantage of Lambeau Field massive for the Packers, unless, of course, you think, well, they don't like playing outside their passing offense, and it gets really cold in Green Bay later in the year in January, so maybe they want to go into domes. But I don't know about benching him if he can play. Obviously, Malik Willis playing very well. 2-0 as a starter, game-winning drive this week. Maybe you think he gives you a better chance of beating Detroit. They have struggled with mobile quarterbacks in the past. Rough game against Arizona earlier in the year. You think Malik Willis scamper around a little bit better than Jordan Love. Maybe you go with that logic. I wouldn't bench him if I didn't have to, though.
Unless you're confident that he's not going to make the injury any worse and it kind of would just stay the same, then I would start him. But if they are worried about that groin injury getting worse and being a multi-week thing, I think it's a situation where they should sit him. So I think we kind of agree. I think I'm maybe a little bit more cautious, but...
Soft, feminine approach to handling injuries. If Jordan Love wants to be like the great Brett Favre, he is going to go out there with his concussions, with his interceptions, with his pulled groin. Brett Favre probably could stand to have his groin put a little bit less in his playing career, but he is going to go out there and play. Keeping things in the NFC North, a flashback to Thursday night. The Vikings lose, addressing the elephant in the room in this game, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much because I don't think it vastly changed the final outcome. The officiating was not great at points. On several third downs, there were ticky-tack phantom holding calls, which prolonged Rams drives, and of course, the clear, egregious, obvious face mask, which even you, an NFL bootlicker, will not argue should have been called in the end
I'm
zone.
not an NFL bootlicker.
You're an NFL bootlicker.
I'm a realist.
You're a real bootlicker, but you will not argue that that one maybe should have been penalized and should not have resulted in
I don't think the penalties are the biggest talking point from this game when it
I'm
comes
not
towards the rest
done.
of the
You
season.
got to address it, though. And the biggest talking point about the game individually would be that. Looking forward, the elephant in the room in terms of looking forward is Christian Darrisaw's done for the year. And the Vikings aren't cooked, but that hurts. That takes the ceiling down a few notches. The inability to have a stonewall left tackle who can just neutralize any edge rusher, stop the best of the best consistently for 2.5, 3, 4 seconds, means you cannot run the same deep, powerful, big play offense, which Minnesota had been at points this year. They've been trying to air it out to Jefferson to a certain extent to Powell and Addison too, but without Darisaw there blocking on that blind side, I don't think Darnold's going to be as comfortable in the pocket. I don't think they're going to be able to complete as many deep balls downfield. Granted, short game stuff, Addison and Jefferson both phenomenal route runners. Hawkinson coming back after the little 10-day mini bye week. All in all, this really hurts the Vikings. I don't think this means their season's done. I think they'll still be a playoff team, but this does take them out of Super Bowl contention for it. Which, hey, this was supposed to be a rebuilding year for Minnesota, so it's not the end of the world, but not good.
It doesn't end their season from a playoff hopes or even Super Bowl hope perspective. Certainly right now when it comes to the regular season and regular season seeding, I think it comfortably now makes them the third best team in the NFC North. I'd put them now comfortably behind the Packers.
3-point win over one of the worst teams in football has got you fired up on Green Bay, huh? The backup quarterback needing to step in and guide Jordan Love to his third victory of the year really has you jazzed about Green Bay.
Comfortably behind the Packers.
Comfortably behind the team they beat.
Behind the Detroit Lions.
Not going to argue about that.
And not having the best left tackle in the NFL, it reduces the margin for error. They're not going to have as much time. The running lanes are not going to be as wide open for Aaron Jones, and he's going to put much more pressure on Sam Darnold to execute on tight window throws. When they want to push the ball down the field, he's going to have to process the defense even quicker and get the ball out sooner. So it is going to be interesting to see what version of Sam Darnold we see with a different left tackle moving forward and an offensive line that is going to have to change some things and develop a different type of chemistry on how they're blocking these elite pass rushers they're going to have to face down the stretch. So it just reduces the margin for error for their offense.
Thankfully, the elite pass rushers were generally front-loaded. They had to deal with the Packers front seven, Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson, not Hutchinson, obviously, because he got hurt. But they had to deal with the best edges they were playing, Bosa, early in the season. Now they get a little bit of a reprieve with the Jaguars, Titans, and Colts back-to-back weeks. Looking at the Vikings defense, they blitzed a season low 35% of the time. Subsequently, a newly reinvigorated Rams offense with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua just picked them apart down the field. They'd score a ton of points, 28 offensively. You need to be better. Flores needs to gear up, blitz again, have a 40-50% blitz rate, generate pressure, which you simply can't get with this Vikings personnel in a four-man pass rush, and make opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable. Unfortunately for Minnesota, Jared Goff, best quarterback in the league at dealing with the blitz. He scared him off a little bit. Matthew Stafford, also phenomenal at handling the blitz. So two bad matchups for Flores. They need to get back to their ways. They need to keep being aggressive, because if you just leave these Vikings cornerbacks on islands in man coverage with receivers at Stephon Gilmore's age, he's not keeping up. The safety should not be matched up with anybody in man for prolonged periods of time. Harrison Smith, old. Bynum, not that fast. Shaq moves like Shaq from the NBA when he was wearing a Celtics jersey. It's not good. They can still be a good defense, but these last 2 weeks have been a bit concerning.
Well, on the Rams side of things, because of how the NFC West has played out, just do not count them out. Their defense, which was putrid over the first several weeks, is starting to turn a corner. That very young front seven, it's really starting to kind of gain some momentum. They are developing. And then this offense, when you reinsert a healthy Puka Nacua back into the offense and you have Cooper Kupp, although it seems he's diminished from his prime, back into the offense, this team still has a chance at winning the NFC West. I mean, they're 3-4. The Cardinals, 49ers, and Seahawks are all 4-4. So they're one game out of first place in the West while their offensive line is getting healthy. They just got their receivers back. Kyron Williams has been on fire. Their defense is getting better. It is completely on the table for this Rams team to get to it's a little aggressive, but to get to 10 wins this season, which we didn't think was at all possible just 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that pass rush gained a ton of momentum, really cohesed once David Quessenberry came in at left tackle. That is much more of a matchup thing than it is them vastly improving.
Well, it's over the last
The Vikings
2
offense
weeks
was
or
doing
so.
just fine in the first half. The thing with the Rams, and I'm going to harp on this, it's why they dropped so many games early in the year. This is an old team which is reliant on Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Matthew Stafford to stay healthy. Their offensive line still is not that good. It makes the decision not to blitz him all the more curious. If this team can stay healthy, I could see 10 wins. The reason I was low on them going into the year, the reason I'm still kind of low on them, I'm questioning Stafford and Kupp and to Puka Nacua now to a certain extent too, his ability to stay on the field. As we've seen when they're out, it's just not the same team, and the offense isn't close to his competence.
Yeah, I mean, if they're done, if Puka Nacua goes down again, back on the IR group, the season's over. But the healthy version of this team, with the current state of the division, they have a shot.
I think most teams in the NFL have a shot.
Most.
Outside of the NFC North. Like, there are not many teams which are completely cooked. Like, even the Colts, who are now going to brilliantly transition to the Vikings' next opponent. We're not talking about the Giants.
The Cowboys are cooked.
Not cooked yet. We're getting close. We're putting the temperature probe in the Cowboys. It's registering 140. We could leave it on a little bit longer, like 5 more degrees, then they're cooked. Vikings' next opponent, the Indianapolis Colts. Oh, man. I was called a hater for the things I said about Anthony Richardson. I said, and I don't know football. I was told he's going to develop. He's going to be a fine passer, and he's such an athletic freak. 10 for 32 is numbers I think is within the wheelhouse for me to put up. Granted, it would not be for the 170 yards he threw for. It'd be for about -4. But
you cannot complete 10 passes.
We're throwing screens. We are throwing screen passes.
They're getting picked off and cribbed.
They're not.
Have you seen you throw a football?
The screen passes are getting completed and will probably result in a tackle. But no, not good for Anthony Richardson. Probably the worst passing performance easily the worst passing performance of the week. You have got to ask yourself, if you're the Colts organization, at what point does it stop being worth it to try and develop this young, future franchise-saving quarterback and try and win now and get to the playoffs with the team you have? You saw they performed against the Texans. This is not a bad team per se. If they put Joe Flacco back in this offense, have him run the show, I could see them with Jonathan Taylor back in the line. They were missing him when they lost to the Jaguars with Flacco, still scored 34 points. With Flacco, I think this is a playoff team, a wildcard team, and maybe could even challenge the Texans for the division now that they're dealing with 2 big injuries at wide receiver and Stroud has regressed. When does it become not worth it to try and develop Richardson? When does it become not worth it to leave him out on the field? Let him learn from behind Flacco on the bench, lad. Let Joe go. Let Joe be elite once again.
They shouldn't give up on Richardson's career. I think they still should try and develop him.
That's not what I'm saying. You know it's not what I'm saying.
It just maybe should not be on the field, because at this point, I think it is pretty clear that the Colts got it right with Shane Steichen. There is a reason this team is 500. From an offensive personnel perspective, they are wasting talent right now. Every single week, we'll see Josh Downs make a spectacular play, or we'll see Michael Pittman make a great catch. We'll see Jonathan Taylor break a good run. But then you have way too many plays where Anthony Richardson is just throwing it into the dirt over people's heads or throwing it to the other team. So at this point in his career, he is a bad NFL passer, maybe even worse than bad. It is like watching the Colts offense right now is like watching what was the Browns offense with Deshaun Watson, except a even worse passer, but a more exceptional athlete in Anthony Richardson when he runs the ball. So the Colts offense is a tough watch. I think if you are the Colts, you put Flacco in there, you let Richardson develop, and something still that I don't think has really been talked about enough is just the fact that Richardson last year had surgery to his throwing shoulder. And when you're a quarterback that struggles with accuracy, guess what? In the offseason before your sophomore year, recovering from surgery to your throwing shoulder, you didn't get to practice that all that much because you're doing rehab and recovery. So I think he's the only quarterbacks younger than him in the NFL right now are Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy.
Woo!
So I think it is just sit him, let him learn, develop behind Joe Flacco, a true veteran quarterback that has been in the NFL for over a decade. And I think the Colts can be a playoff team this year.
I mean, I think they've got to win the division. The wild card, depends how bad you think the AFC is. An 8-win team could conceivably grab that final wildcard spot with how some of these divisions are looking. The division title for the AFC South is still definitely there with how bad the Texans are playing. I'm curious what they're going to look like going forward. Obviously, they give a bit of a gimme next week against the Jets, although that one is going to be on the road, and we have seen how C.J. Stroud performs on the road this year. It's pretty bad. He's now missing Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins, who I believe will not be coming back for the Jets game. But right now, Stroud's been left throwing to Tank Dell and Dalton Schultz. Now, if you know how I feel about those two guys, not good. Not good at all.
You're not a big Dalton Schultz guy?
Not a big Dalton Schultz guy. Not a big fringe top 15 tight end guy. I'm unmoved. I'm so motionless, I'm going backwards. This offense is really just going to boil down to Joe Mixon's ability to generate yards after contact. The O-line's doing a fine job, but unless Mixon can break those carries into the second level, get 10 yards where he should have got 4 or 5. This offense isn't going to move the ball. Credit to him, he's doing that at a very high level, having by far the best season of his career. But Houston, you got to ask yourself, what is the issue here? What is our goal for this season? Have we peaked? Have we lost our chance to compete for the Super Bowl in 2024? We're going to have to move forward and try and rebuild the roster, younger, healthier, whatnot. Stephon Diggs is leaving in free agency, by the way.
Well, I don't think they have peaked necessarily because
for the season they've peaked.
There hasn't really been a great point this season. We're like, wow, the Texans are a good team.
Pretty good week one. Joe Mixon ran for what? 120, 130? Good game.
And Nico Collins presumably is going to be back this year. And the important thing for them is that they've just been stacking up wins. They've only lost 2 games so far. So when they've stacked up wins, even though it's been 1-score games, if they get Nico Collins back this year and they are in the playoffs, this offense can turn the corner. Because one of my coldest takes this season from the preseason is I didn't believe in Joe Mixon, but he's been one of the 3 best running backs in the NFL right next to Saquon and Derrick Henry. So if they get Nico Collins back and they can really turn their passing game around, they can beat anyone. You kind of doubt that to happen with the fact they haven't done it halfway through the season.
I mean, it's a non-contact knee injury on Diggs. I kind of think he's done. Maybe they can wind it back. Maybe it's a weird case where there are too many mouths to feed on the offense. Maybe they just get back to Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and Dalton Schultz from last year that revitalizes things. Well, I'm not saying this team has peaked in general. I just don't think they're going to reach those heights we were talking about preseason. That 13, 14 win team, which could go into the AFC playoffs and challenge the Chiefs and duel with the very best. I don't see that happening this year.
To be fair, I think I predicted 12 wins. But
okay, well, congratulations.
49ers, Cowboys, just going to mention them briefly. For me, it doesn't change my opinion on either team. The Cowboys, I think they're cooked. I think their season's completely over. You mentioned them not being there yet, but what hope do they really have? They're playing a 49ers team that's kind of destroyed by injury. This was an opportunity for Dak and CD to prove that they can take over a game on their own and win it against a team that is kind of struggling right now, but they just didn't do that. The run defense, pathetic again. The 49ers averaged 6 yards a carry. The Cowboys probably still will win 6 to 8 games, making their draft pick not as good to maybe get a superstar in next year's draft. And then on the 49ers things, congratulations. You beat up on a worse coach team, a less talented team. You're still struggling. It wasn't an overly impressive performance.
God, you're a hater. You know that. This team banged up to all hell. It crawls to a win, a convincing one. I know the final score doesn't tell you, but they looked much better than the Cowboys. They're a team you would kind of lump into the same tier of being mediocre and banged up. And because you're getting barbecued in the comments section of that TikTok clip you posted, you're bitter at the 49ers fans. Grow up, man. Good win for the 49ers.
It's a good win.
I'm having a little bit more faith. If they can just get CMC back, because they were down to their 3rd string running back, and they're still churning out the 6 yards a carry you talked about, the high level of production. If CMC can get on the field after the bye week, which he is projected to do, kind of think they win the division still. I know high on the Rams. We're not high on the Seahawks or Cardinals. You think maybe they can stay healthy and do it. I could see this team winning out once Christian McCaffrey gets back to the field.
And they can certainly win the division. I'm not saying they are a lost cause team, but they're not the same 49ers team we've seen in years past. You probably still take most of the NFC North over them come playoff time. I certainly would take the Commanders. And then there's a few teams that would be a coin flip, like the Philadelphia Eagles, the Atlanta Falcons, if the Buccaneers get Mike Evans healthy down the stretch. So I just don't think it's all that special of a 49ers team. I'm not saying they're not a playoff team. I think that certainly can still happen, but they're not a special team that we saw last year or years prior.
I mean, the problem with that is you look at the NFC, and I think right now you might feel higher about the Packers than I do. I personally don't after a 3-point win over the Jags. It's kind of Detroit and everyone else. So them not being on the same level as Detroit, being in the same tier as a bunch of other teams, that's kind of the state of the conference right now. And come playoff time, Kyle Shanahan has experience winning the NFC. You like to think he gets his team to rise in the playoffs. They've got experience which other teams don't. So they're probably favored to win a few playoff games they wouldn't be on paper in the regular season, just because the experience being there, better coaching, certainly better coaching than the Eagles, the Buccaneers, probably on about the same level as the Packers, but they've won the matchup against the Packers in the playoffs a few times. So
that is a fair point. I will give you the experience. Yes.
Defense and experience wins championships. Side note, the 49ers will not be playing again until after the election. Here's the way too early prediction. If Kamala Harris winds up winning, I'm not going to say Nick Bosa is a friend of the program. Nick Bosa against Baker Mayfield, a quarterback he despises since his college days, is going to have about 4 sacks and probably snap Baker's fibula in half. So Baker Mayfield's voting for Trump.
And with that, that has been our Week 8 reactions. Let us know what you thought about some of the upsets down in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, use code Thicc on Underdog. You get bonus cash up to $1,000, and we will see you in the next one.